All right, I think we've got everybody in. It looks like we've got a good number. Thanks everyone for joining us tonight. This is our Atlanta Audubon webinar on wildlife photography, shooting and editing in RAW. Glad everyone can join us today. My name is Michelle Hamner. I am the Director of Development for Atlanta Audubon, and we've got Stephen Ramsden here looking at us very closely with his binoculars. And just a few little housekeeping notes before we kick things off. I hope that everyone's doing well and enjoying the birds this spring. It's certainly been different for all of us at Atlanta Audubon, but we have been happy to join all of you through a number of different virtual events. If you haven't already done so, I definitely invite you to join Atlanta Audubon as a member. And you can do that on our website at atlantaaudubon.org. And I'll drop a link here in our chat box for you that you can follow. Also want to share just a couple of upcoming events with you. Of course, we are doing this webinar tonight. I am recording it, and after a couple of days, we will post that recording on our website, and I'll put a link there for you to follow where you can find all of that along with a lot of other digital resources that we have produced lately. So just for any questions that you may have, if you will just put those over into that chat box or into the question and answer box. We'll get to those here in a bit. We're going to let Stephen take things and run with it, and then we'll go to the question and answer portion. One other thing, definitely check us out on Friday mornings at 9 o'clock on our Facebook page, the Atlanta Audubon Facebook page. We're doing virtual live bird walks every Friday morning at 9 o'clock. Stephen's been joining us for a couple of those over the past couple of weeks out at Clyde Shepherd Nature Preserve. It's been a lot of fun. We're seeing some really cool stuff. So check us out there. And I think that's about all of my housekeeping notes I wanted to give you. So I'm going to introduce Stephen. So Stephen Ramstein is the director of Sunlit Earth, founder and director of the Charlie Bates Solar Astronomy Project. He's retired Navy and air traffic controller. And his Sunlit Earth Facebook page, I definitely encourage you guys to check that out. He posts a lot of really cool photography there, along with all of the members of that Facebook group. And that's a nonprofit organization that supports solar astronomy outreach, nature hikes, teaches about sunlight's effect on terrestrial biosystems. He also supports general STEM outreach by spreading information, teaching classes like this, supplying equipment and logistical support in the United States and 27 countries around the world. He's also one of the best bird nerds I know, all around good guy. So I'm going to kick it over to you now, Stephen.
All right, here we go. Thank you, Atlanta Audubon, for letting me host this webinar. Michelle talked me up pretty good. Most of you already know me anyway. I like to study light. I'm into the visible light spectrum from the sun, or stars, or galaxies, or anything deep space. Light has just always fascinated me. You know, how does it start? You know, where does this light begin? What causes light to occur? It's just a fascinating subject to me. It always has been since I was a little kid. My first telescope, my mom got me from the Sears catalog, and within an hour on Christmas Day, I had already melted the eyepiece by pointing at the sun. Light is fascinating. So when my buddy Charlie, who was a military veteran like me and an air traffic controller, when he killed himself in 2008, I thought, you know, why did that happen? You know, what's up with that? And I thought, what's a great way to remember this guy? He's real generous. So I decided I would kill two birds with one stone, so to speak, and address the total lack of science and critical thinking skills around me, and also try to honor my buddy. So the program is named in memoriam, and we try to teach science and critical thinking and reason. It got real popular, and it's the largest solar astronomy program in the world, but most of my local friends here don't know anything about that because I just do it internationally now. We did it for 10 years in the US. Now we're concentrating that program in the other 27 countries. Here in the US, we're doing, still doing some Charlie Bates solar astronomy, but mostly we're doing Sunlit Earth, which is the terrestrial version of it, where we look at how sunlight and the different wavelengths of light affect living organisms and the structure of life. You know, it's called spectroscopy, but that's a real snoozer, so I call it sunlight. Studying the light from our nearest star, which is a fascinating topic. Most people, you know, have no idea about it. They just take it for granted because, you know, it's always there. Everything we've ever seen in natural light is illuminated by this star's nuclear fusion. And it travels 93 million miles from the sun through our atmosphere. Most of it's filtered out, just the visible light wavelengths and the radio waves make it through our atmosphere. And that's what illuminates everything you've ever seen or ever will see. I find it to be a fascinating topic. So when I'm doing these bird hikes and nature hikes and wildlife photography, you know, photography for me started as a teenager with film cameras doing astronomy, just hooking them to a telescope and taking pictures of galaxies and the sun or anything I could take a picture of. When I retired from air traffic control in 2014, I thought it would be a good idea to start taking nature walks, you know, because air traffic control took a big toll on me physically. So I did, and I noticed how many awesome things were around me, and I started carrying a camera and just transferred my astrophotography hobby over to nature. These cameras that we use are, you know, nobody I know is using more than about 10% of the capabilities of their camera. They're way fancier than we can comprehend, but everybody's got to have a cool camera. So one of the things I noticed with photographers is that a lot of them, they get kind of apprehensive about getting too deep into the settings and how to use the camera and what to do. They just don't want to be bothered. They want to use a point and shoot and just get a quick photo they can, you know, stick on Facebook or print or whatever. But then they also want to take fantastically good photos at the same time, and that technology doesn't exist. So these DSLRs that we all use, you can get a lot more out of them if you start shooting what's called the RAW format, and that's what this lecture is going to be about. It's more just a let's talk about it kind of thing. Every camera ever made, a digital camera, already shoots in a RAW format. If you're shooting with a Canon, the RAW format now it ends in .cr3, Canon RAW version 3. If you're shooting with a Nikon camera, it ends in .dmg, which means digital negative. Olympus, Pentax, even your iPhone or a small point and shoot that you buy is also shooting in RAW. A lot of the cameras in the point and shoot range don't allow you to even see the RAW before they process it into a JPEG internally. What's the difference? Why should you shoot in RAW? Well, we're going to talk about that. Let me share my screen real quick. I know that you'd rather look at me because I am quite handsome, but we're gonna share the screen if we can. Let's see where that is. Share screen. Okay. Share. Play. I hope that's working. Michelle, is that working? Very good.
Looks good to me.
Okay.
Your video on you,
okay,
Stephen, is a little blurry. And I think it might just be a network connection on that part, but
a little blurry.
This image looks good. Your video for you.
Well, sorry about that.
Screen share looks good.
Oh, my video? Yeah, that's okay. I don't care. I look better with a little blur, you know, like most of us. And that's also part of this lecture, how to get rid of that blur. So this is a chip in a Canon camera. It's called a Cmos chip. Every camera on Earth has a version of this type chip, a CCD or a Cmos chip. And what it does is it records the sun's visible light wavelengths and gives them a numerical value on each pixel. So when you see a camera that's 50 megapixels, that means it's got 50 million total pixels. Each one of them records a different wavelength of sunlight, usually either red, green, or blue, and it gives it a numerical value. And it saves this in a numerical array. And that's what a raw image is. It's just a gigantic spreadsheet that records a value for the brightness of each wavelength of light on different pixels. And this slide shows all the different size chips you can get in your camera. From the left to the right. The left, this medium format is gigantic. I have, those are over $100,000 for a camera like that. The full frame on the second left is what a lot of photographers use, and the APS-C is the most common chip, like the Canon 7D and the Nikons that most people use, they're using APS-C, which means cropped. So it's a smaller chip than the full frame. The full frame chip is designed to mimic 35mm film. So way over there on the right is your iPhone or smartphone or whatever you're using. And it's got a 0.15 cubic centimeter chip, but they can still get 8 million pixels in that sucker. And that's pretty amazing. What is it? Complementary metal oxide semiconductor. We're not going to spend too much time here because it's sort of boring. It's an array of pixels, as you can see. They're all monochrome pixels, but each chip has a different filter on top of the pixel, so only one wavelength of light can get through. Red, green, and blue are what we use in cameras. sRGB is what it's called. And that allows the human eye to see a really high resolution image of whatever you're seeing. So this chip is recording the sun's visible light wavelengths after it's been diffracted, refracted, absorbed, or reflected from some object's boundary that you're looking at. And that's what they're designed to do. So you're recording sunlight when you do this. How? Well, it's a long, complicated subject, but really, as long as you understand that the chips on the pixel, the number of megapixels is how many pixels there are, and then you divide that by 3, and that's how many green pixels there are, or how many blue pixels there are, how many red pixels there are. So that's how these things work. The top image shows what it looks like on a monochrome camera, which we use in astronomy a lot, where a 50 megapixel camera is actually 50 million pixels of monochrome light, but it doesn't discriminate between wavelengths. On the bottom, for a color camera, you use the same type array, it's just that they have red, green, and blue filters above them, so only certain wavelengths get into certain pixels. And we're not going to get too much deeper into this, but this is what a camera does, a digital camera. The raw file format, let's talk about it over here. When you take a raw image, the camera always records it raw. Like I say, it's an array of numbers, comes straight off the chip. If it's an 8 megapixel sensor, you get 8 million numbers. And it creates a image, just like back in the 60s when NASA would send back photos from space, you'd have these big giant printouts of computer sheets with just numbers in a spreadsheet type array. And that's how you take pictures. That's how the digital camera takes the pictures. One of the main differences in shooting in RAW versus JPEG is that RAW is a 12-bit depth image. What does that mean? Well, JPEG is 8-bit depth. And when you shoot an image with 8 bits of depth, you get a possible 256 colors maximum. When you shoot an image with 12 bits of depth, you get 4,096 colors available. So you have an exponentially greater amount of shades of color, basically, which allows you to have exponentially greater clarity and editing possibilities. So 8-bit versus 12-bit is probably the #1 reason to shoot in RAW. Why? Here's some more reasons. When you shoot in RAW, you record all of the data from the sensor. Yeah, so if you're shooting in RAW, and every camera shoots in RAW, what I'm saying is don't shoot in JPEG on your $2,000 DSLR because you're just throwing away the raw data. The raw data is just like you're still at the camera. So if you have all the settings screwed up, which some of us do sometimes, if you have a raw image, it's basically like you're still sitting there and you can readjust all those settings and take the image again using that data. So you get a much higher quality, greater levels of brightness. Like I said before, JPEG maximum levels or shades of color, 256. RAW, somewhere between 4,096 for a 12-bit camera, which is most of our DSLRs, to over 16,000 for a 14-bit camera, which some people also use. You can easily correct dramatically over and underexposed images. Yeah, I know none of us have ever overexposed or underexposed an image, but if you happen to do it on a bad day, if you shoot in RAW, it's no big deal. This reminds me of a little thing I did with Adam Betchel where he went to Central America a couple years ago, and he didn't have any real experience with a DSLR, but he wanted to take some really great photos. So I loaned him a camera, showed him about an hour of how to use it, had everything set for him. It was all good. He got there and the terrain was so treacherous that, you know, he's carrying the camera on a strap and he kept hitting his hips and just reset all the settings to horrible settings. So he took all these photos, he came back, and pretty much every photo on the card was just solid black because the settings had been screwed up so much. But he shot them all in RAW, so he sent them over, and I said, let me see what I can do. And we were able to pull fantastically beautiful photos out of that trip, even though every one of them was shot in horrible settings and all underexposed. And he went on to do a presentation to the Audubon Society with those images. So that's the kind of saving you can get from shooting in RAW. Had those been shot in JPEG? Impossible. Nothing you could have done with it. So the white balance, just like every other feature on the camera, if you're shooting it in a RAW and saving it as a RAW, the white balance, the color, tint, the temperature, all that stuff is easily adjustable all throughout the entire spectrum. You shoot it in JPEG, you got a tiny little window to edit in. If you shoot it in RAW, you can edit anything. You can edit everything. So that's another reason. Better detail. Obviously, we've talked about that already. Non-destructive editing. This is something that you'll run into once you start doing this. If you've tried to edit a JPEG, once you save it, you can't go backwards. You can't unedit what you did. So you've lost the ability to do even more every time you edit the JPEG. With a RAW file, when you're editing, the RAW importer that you use, in our case, Photoshop, Adobe Camera Raw, it's called, saves all the changes you made, and you can just reverse those anytime you want. You can go back to the original RAW file. It's non-destructive. Editing a photo doesn't destroy the original data in the RAW file. That's a fantastic thing, because when I started, I thought I was great, but 2 years later, I was a whole lot better than I thought, than I was to begin with. So having these old RAW photos, I could go back and re-edit them. And doing that with a RAW file is easy. Doing that with a JPEG or a PNG or whatever, internet format you save it in, it's impossible. So that's another reason. By the way, your iPhone 11, if you're using one, or your other brand phone has a 12 megapixel, 12 megapixel cameras in it. That's 36 million pixels in this little bitty deal here. This is more than every Apollo space mission combined ever launched had total with all their cameras. So, if you're not using a DSLR yet and you're using an iPhone or a point and shoot, there'll be some information in here you can use as well. But believe me, the technology is so far advanced now that really anybody can get out there and take exquisitely beautiful nature photos with just a little bit of practice. Sunlit Earth, we do these photo hikes. Let me stop sharing my screen. We do these photo hikes every couple of weeks at different nature preserves, usually at the Clyde Shepherd Nature Preserve, because I spend a lot of time there and I'm on the board that takes care of it, whatever. But we'll have 10 or 15 people walk around, and some of our sponsored photographers like Kevin Gaston or Bonnie or, some of the different people will show you all the different techniques they've learned. And it really shortens the learning curve for everybody. So once this plague is over with and we can start having people out again, I'd love for you to come out to one of our photo hikes and just walk around with one of us and, hone your skills a little bit. Because if you're toting around a $5,000 DSLR and you're shooting your images in JPEG, you are crazy, okay? You might as well use a point and shoot or an iPhone, because that's all the quality you're getting out of it. So let's get into my workflow. I go out a lot and shoot images. By the way, here's a camera. This is an old beat up Canon 40D, 10-year-old camera that anybody can go buy on eBay for $200 and use it to take fantastic photos. Some of our, in fact, well, arguably our best photographer in Sunlit Earth uses a Canon 40D that we gave her, and her images are absolutely fantastic. So you don't need to buy the latest, greatest one, but you do need to get yourself into a DSLR with a real lens. There's the chip in there, okay? That's what it looks like, sorry about that. And once you've taken all your camera, all the settings, the ISO, the white balance, the shutter speed, the aperture, we'll do that in another Audubon lecture. Hopefully, there's my dog coming in. But for now, we're talking about the finished recorded image in RAW. So generally, when I've taken my image, I'll get the card out, okay? And of course, there's a million different ways to do this. This is just how I do it. It's an intro to raw editing. Everybody's got a different opinion. This is just how I do it. I thought it might be interesting. Put this in my card reader, okay? Then go over and drag and drop it onto my desktop. And we're gonna make believe I just did that. I've already done it before the video to save some time. And what it looks like is that. So you've got this folder content here. Oh, let me share my screen. Hold on. Sorry about that. All right, shared, and I'm gonna try to turn off my video if I can. I can't do that. Okay. Let's see. Hide self-view. There you go. All right, so Michelle, can you make sure that we're seeing my screen right now? If she's paying attention.
I see a list of files there.
Okay, good. So what we've got here is my raw images from today's shoot. Here they are. And this is a Mac that I'm using. It doesn't matter if it's a PC or a Mac or whatever. I use all Macs just because that's what I use. Your PC or your Linux system or your there's a million different operating systems. They all have some type of Adobe Raw editor, which I guess I should mention now. In this webinar, we're going to be using Adobe Camera Raw, which is part of Lightroom. It's part of Adobe Bridge. It's part of Adobe Fireworks. It's part of Adobe Photoshop. They all use the same raw importer. You don't have to have any Adobe products to do this. You can use the software that came with your DSLR because they all contain some sort of a raw importer. Like Canon Photo Professional comes with the Canon camera. I don't know what comes with Nikon. But the point here is we're going to use the raw importer. And that's a piece of software that either came with your camera or is included in your favorite graphics program, in my case, Adobe Photoshop. And we're going to open it with the raw importer. Another webinar in the future may deal with Adobe Photoshop because there's about 50 million things you can do with the camera or with the photo once you've imported it through the raw importer. Today, we're just going to show some very simple steps to import with the Adobe Camera Raw, which is included in Lightroom or Photoshop. It's the same exact program. We're not even going to use Photoshop or Lightroom because I don't use either one of them. I just use the Camera Raw importer. So here's how I do that. Let's say I've got 10,000 photographs today. I'm going to highlight all of them, drag them down here to my Photoshop icon, okay? And they should all open. And there we go. Okay. So this is the Adobe Camera Raw interface screen. A lot of you might recognize this from Lightroom if you're using Lightroom. Just a quick note on that. Lightroom and Photoshop differ in many ways. Lightroom is an organizational program which keeps libraries and copies of all your raw files and records all the edits you do. Lightroom is extraordinarily hard drive space hog. It will fill everybody's hard drive in no time. It's a great program for organizing, and it also has the Adobe Camera Raw importer, so you can do everything in Lightroom that you're doing in Photoshop as far as the raw importer goes. Photoshop is a photo editing program. It is not an organizational program. I prefer to organize the files myself. I don't keep copies of old raw images because on the camera that I use, every raw is 22 megabytes. And when you've got, 3,000 per day, that adds up really quick. I've got 40 terabytes of storage on this Mac, and I'm halfway through it in 3 years. So if you've got a little 500 gig hard drive on your Mac, you're going to fill that up in about 6 months easily. So I use Adobe Camera Raw and Photoshop, and I organize my files myself, and we're going to go through how I do that. This saves a ton of space by not saving the raw files. Of course, you also lose the ability to go pull up the raw file again and edit it. But when you get really good, if you edit it right, you don't have to pull it up again. So everybody kind of, in the beginning, they want to keep a copy of all the raw files. But I've yet to see anybody really go back and have an actual need to get to an old raw file. You know, Kevin Gaston is the wizard, so he does go back and edit some of his old raw files, but most people just keep them as a security blanket when you really don't need to. So this is the screen you get when you drag and drop your raw files onto Photoshop or whatever software you're using that has a raw import. Now this file is a duck, you know, and normally when we do this, we'll have 15 or 20 different pictures of the same one and hope that one or two of them are in focus. What I've done for this webinar is kind of deleted all the crappiest photos, and I've kept some of the better photos that were actually in focus. Here's the duckling, okay, and I'm zooming in on it. And the different tools on this raw importer in Lightroom or Photoshop are across the top. You have a magnifying glass, you have a hand where you can move the image around, color droppers, which we'll talk about later. Really important one here is called the adjustment brush, which we'll definitely use here in a moment. Gradients, you can rotate the image, you can rotate the image back, you can apply a weird gradient, whatever. We're gonna start off with the simple things. On the right side of the screen are all the different adjustments you can do. So you've got temperature, which, you know, makes it just look, wait a minute, let's go back to that. Okay. The temperature is basically the white balance. Temperature and tint are white balance. Right now it's set as white balance is shot. You can choose one of the pre-stored macros for making it look cool. This is the white balance pre-store for a cloudy day. That's for fluorescent. You know, I like to keep it just as shot because I use auto white balance on my camera, and that's usually good enough. Now, the problems with this image are that it's overexposed on the left side because the sun is shining right on here, and it's underexposed on the duckling because the duckling is in the shade. So the other side of the duck is bright from the sun, this side is dark. Ideally, you'd want to take a better photograph by getting on the other side of the duck, except I'd be standing in 4 feet of water if I did that. So for this image, you can just turn up the exposure, which is the first adjustment dial on the right. Okay, there you go. Now you can see the duck a lot better. The problems, well, of course, everything else is blown out too. So in order to fix things like that, Adobe will let you adjust the highlights or the shadows individually. Shadows are the dark parts of the image and the highlights are the bright parts. So let's turn down the highlights, turn up the shadows, and then add a little exposure, and it already looks a million times better than it did. Okay, that's before on the left and after on the right. That's just with 3 seconds worth of adjustment. So a very, very, very rudimentary examination of this. Let's get back to the original image if I can. There we go. All right, so yeah, that's pretty cool. Let's do something else. Let's knock out some of the unnecessary stuff in this photo by using the crop tool, which is up here on the top, crop. And those of you that know about photography, when you crop, you want to have your subject, or you want the person's eyes to be focused on 1/3 of the image, either vertically or horizontally. It's called the rule of thirds, but basically it's a long drawn out way of saying just put the bird off center. And generally we want to have more space towards where the bird is looking than the back of the bird, so it looks like the bird is going through the photo. Okay, so I'll do that again if you want. That was our original size on the sensor, but I want to crop it so that the bird is in 1/3 of the frame and he's got empty space to swim into. There you go. So there's a crop, and when you hit return, there's your new image. By the way, if you did this with a Jpeg photograph, it would look horrible. Enlarging it with a RAW, nothing to it. I can go all the way down to the eye of this bird and still have a really sharp image with a RAW photograph. With a Jpeg, impossible. All right, so now we've got it cropped nicely. This is a little bright over here. This is a little dark here. So we can try some more shadows if you want. We can take the highlights down a little bit. We can put the exposure up again. These are all very rudimentary settings, which are impossible with a Jpeg image, but easy with a RAW. In this case, this bird is still a little dark here, and you can't see any reflection in the eyeball. So I keep saying my internet connection is unstable. I'm sorry about that. I'm doing my best. The hamsters are pedaling as fast as they can. So we're going to use the adjustment brush. What is the adjustment brush? That allows you to adjust just a certain portion of the image without adjusting the rest of it. So I click the adjustment brush and go over here, and I just kind of mark off some of the image, mask it off like we say in Photoshop. Okay, very rudimentary adjustment brush usage here. And then just this part of the image will be changed by what I do. So I turn it up a little bit, bring up the shadows some more, and as you can see, the duck's face is now visible. Okay, you can do all kinds of things with that adjustment brush. It is an awesome, awesome feature. So in 10 seconds worth of adjustments, we've taken that image, let's see, and turn it into this image using a raw file. We didn't even touch on texture, sharpening, clarity, any of that stuff, or saturation. This is just the most basic rudimentary adjustments possible. So let's try it again. All right, if you do saturation, boy, look how beautiful that is. That's increasing the color saturation. Dehaze takes some of the haze out of the image. Texture increases the texture of the image. And it's just a beautiful image. Let's go on to another one. We'll skip that one because we've already done the ducklings long enough. Oh, that's a pretty cute image, huh? Let's just quickly turn up the shadows on this image. Look at that. One adjustment. There you go. I think it's really amazing how easy it is to edit a raw photo. Okay, I could just leave it like that. I mean, it's absolutely beautiful after one adjustment. I'm just going to crop it. And there you go. You can even tell that this duckling's eye is closed. Its nictitating baby membrane is closed over, and this one's eye is open. All that just from one small adjustment in RAW. By the way, as you zoom in, you might notice it gets a little noisy. Well, there's also a noise reduction tool over here on the right. Apply noise reduction. It gets rid of noise in the RAW image. Amazing stuff. So if you're shooting in RAW, I suggest not using the noise reduction in the camera. Turn that mess off, because you can think better than your camera when it comes to your photos. So turn off all that stuff. Shoot in RAW with no noise reduction, and then do the noise reduction on your camera. All right, here's a pretty popular photo of a titmouse. Let me check in with Michelle. Is everything going all right, Michelle? She says yes.
Great.
Everything is
We've
great.
got Cheryl would like to know which version of Photoshop are you using?
Oh, that's a good question. I use Photoshop Creative Cloud, and I'll tell you why. I use a Canon 1DX Mark II. Any new Canon or Nikon DSLR, they've kind of given me the shaft on that because they won't import their raw images into anything prior to Photoshop Creative Cloud. So listen, when I started using Photoshop, it was $1,600 for one license for Photoshop CS4. Now, Photoshop has gone the route of subscriptions, which is a pain. Nobody likes it, but it's so much cheaper than it was before, and you get constantly updated software. So I pay $119 a year now for Lightroom and Photoshop, which comes with 3 or 4 other programs, and it is a steal. I don't do it monthly because I don't want them having my credit card info. I just buy it yearly, and we are using Photoshop CC in this webinar. The raw importer looks a little different in Photoshop CC and Lightroom CC than it did in Lightroom Classic, but there's several new features that really make it so you don't even have to use Photoshop or Lightroom. You can just use the raw importer for all of your editing, which is what I do. So I strongly recommend Photoshop CC. There are other programs out there that you can edit images with, and they all use very similar raw importers. But like I say, this webinar is Photoshop CC, which is available from adobe.com. Okay, we'll go on with the lecture. This is a titmouse eating a dragonfly. Yeah, that's a pretty cool shot. I want this shot to look better because obviously it's overexposed here. Really, it's overexposed everywhere, and it's just kind of harsh looking. So I want it to look a little better. That's the original shot right there. I want to zoom in some. Yeah, my internet connection is unstable again. and I'm going to crop it first. Okay, so let's crop it down so we're using 1/3 of the image, 2/3, etc. And I'm cropping it so that the bird is looking into empty space over here, and that's better. There are so many things you can do to this image. I completely removed this entire stick and leaves right here, but that's something for the advanced Photoshop course. Right now, we're just going to do rudimentary editing to get a really sharp and nice photo. So the first thing I'm going to do is turn down my exposure. Okay, so there we go. If I go all the way down with it, you can see the bird is beautiful, but now the background is a little bit too dark. So I'm going to go back up with it, and I'm going to take my highlights over here and turn down the highlights, which just turns down the bright part of the image. Okay. Then the shadows, yeah, it doesn't really make much difference because there isn't any shadows in this image really. I'm going to turn up my saturation a bit, maybe a little dehaze, a little texture. Look how sharp that dragonfly is, man. I mean, this is awesome. It might be a damselfly. This is an awesome image, and I want it to look better than it looks because I didn't really have enough time to set my camera perfectly. So I'm going to start from here, maybe throw in a little contrast. All right, now, a big thing in bird photography is everybody wants the catch light in the eye, this little dot of bright light right here. That's cool, but I also want to see the eye. This is a perfect time to use the adjustment brush. When you use the adjustment brush, it gives you the ability just to adjust one little tiny section of the photograph. So I'm going to change my pixel size down to about the size of that eye. And then I'm going to paint a mask. And this is very simple. It might seem complicated now, obviously, but as soon as you do this a couple times, there's nothing to it. So I'm going to paint a mask around the eye. Okay. I'm going to feather that a little bit so it's not a stark difference. So it's kind of feathered into the surrounding areas whenever I make a change. And then I'm going to make the mask invisible so I can see the changes as they occur. And let's turn up the shadows just in the eye and maybe the exposure. So you can go way too far like that, which I see people do all the time. Don't do that. Just a subtle change, man. I mean, look at the difference right there. It's unbelievable what you can do with a raw file versus a JPEG. There is no way you can do that with a JPEG, okay? It'd be impossible. So let's go back and zoom in a little bit on that. Look at the difference that made. Let's go to before and after. Yeah, it's just unbelievable how much difference. You know, I keep saying unbelievable. It is unbelievable to me. This is technology in action. You don't have to be the world's greatest photographer to get fantastic photos. So there's a really rudimentary editing of this titmouse shot. And I might take down the highlights a little bit more, maybe come off the saturation some, maybe a little bit less. There you go. And it's good. You know, if you don't like the crop, go in and change the crop. You know, let's crop it that way so it's a little bit more thirds. There. You can even see the detail on the veins on the damselfly's wings. I know I'm talking on and on and on, but I'm really excited about sharing this with people because the #1 thing that improves people's images on these bird hikes we do, I mean, #1 by a long shot, is getting people to finally take the plunge, put that camera on manual settings and record in RAW. Okay, you spent $2 grand on it, get it off auto. Stop shooting in JPEG. All right, let's go to the next photo. Blue jay eating a tadpole. Just gonna do a quick edit here to show the things you can do. Turn up shadows. There, turn down the highlights, saturation, little texture, crop it down. You know, I want to show what's interesting in the photograph. To me, what's interesting is the bird eating the tadpole, not necessarily the bird's tail feathers. So I'm going to crop out some of those. And, you know, like I say, everybody's got their own technique. They do what they want to do. That's cool. This is how I do it. And these are the tools that you can use to edit raw photos, which I think is the subject of this. Let's go in and get the adjustment brush to bring up the eye a little bit. We've already got it set from the last time we used it. It remembers the settings I had last time. I'm going to turn it up even a little bit more. Look at that. Very cool. So now we have the bird's eye. You know, just tiny, tiny details make a huge difference in wildlife photography. All right, let's look at this one. Cedar Waxwing. Yeah, I'm going to skip that. Those things are a pain. All right, let's get over here.
Even while you're finding your next image, let me toss a
That
couple of
photo's not
questions
really-
to you.
Sure, sure.
Can you hear me? Okay. Yep. Michael would like to
Feel like I'm drowning
know,
on-
what can you tell us about the Lightroom? Yep. What can you tell us about the Lightroom app on the iPhone, and how does it compare to what's available on a desktop? Does it allow you to edit raw files?
No, it is not really possible to do this on a mobile phone yet. There are JPEG editing. You know, you can take the picture as a JPEG and edit it on your phone, but it's a waste of time for the same reason it's a waste of time to edit JPEGs on your camera. Yeah, you know, a lot of people take images in JPEG and they look pretty good. I don't care how good the photo is in JPEG, it's not nearly as good as it would have been if they shot it in RAW. And I do have some Sunlit Earth photographers that only shoot in JPEG for whatever reason, and their images are great. But 5 minutes at the Mac showing them what they could be, they all change over to RAW. So as far as Lightroom on the iPhone goes, I would say no, not really the same thing. The iPad app does have a lot of editing features in it. They have a Photoshop for the iPad also, but I don't believe either one of those will import RAW images, to my knowledge.
Thanks. Do you have any tips on managing the raw files and storing them? Any recommendations for specific external hard drives or SD cards?
Absolutely. And that's the last part of the lecture. So stay tuned. Okay. All right, so here we go. Here's an image that's out of focus. This is a blue-gray gnatcatcher hanging off a limb, you know, looking for something to eat. Guess what you can do with focus in Adobe Raw Importer? Nothing. That's right. They still have not come up with the capability to fix your crappy out of focus images. So unfortunately, if you're looking for an image of a stem, it is in focus. But if you're looking for an image of a bird and it's out of focus, don't waste your time. Take a better image. All right, here's another Cedar Waxwing. We'll zoom in here real tight on this one. And, you know, this bird is really tough because it's got these super bright, it's like an egret. It's got this super bright front body, yellow and white, and then it's got this black mask on and this black tail. I mean, it's really tough to edit, but you can do some things with it. Just turn up shadows a little bit, a little exposure, bring down the highlights, some saturation, come over and crop. You know, 10 seconds later, it's a better image. It could be a lot better if I'd been in a better position to take this image, but it looks a lot better than it did as a JPEG. Yeah, on a future image, we're going to blur the background. See how this beautiful bokeh behind here where everything's blurred? That's kind of what you want in your images also, to get the eye to pay attention to the subject. But this one is already blurred because I'm using a really high-end lens. You can create this bokeh with Adobe Raw Importer, which we're going to do on an image coming up. Talk about tough subject. And Michelle, you feel free to interrupt anytime you want. You know, I'll keep talking. This is an American goldfinch. Very tough subject to photograph. Super overexposed here, barely visible in the black. This is pretty common in nature photography. What do you do with an image like this? Well, in Adobe Camera Raw, you have 4,096 levels of every color on every pixel to change around if you shoot in RAW format. If you shot this image in JPEG, you have less than 5% of that ability. So that's a great reason to shoot in RAW. So let's turn down the highlights. Look at that, man. Look at all that detail that showed up just from that one adjustment. Let's turn up the shadows a little bit. That doesn't really make much difference. If you go much on saturation here, it's totally oversaturated in the yellow because this bird is super bright. By the way, the sun emits about 85% of its energy in yellow and green light. And this bird is very bright because of that fact. It reflects the yellow light, which is most of the sun's energy. This might be a good time for the adjustment brush. What do you think? Let's crop this image. And I'm a big fan of tight crops. Not everybody is. That's fine. Crop it whatever way you like. I think that looks cool. Notice I left the empty space over here on the left where the bird's looking. Then I'm going to come in with my adjustment brush, do a little eye work, increase it a little bit. I mean, the eye's pretty bright, but it's hard to see it because this yellow is so bright and blowing everything out. All right, so just a couple of adjustments has made this a great photograph. On the left is before, on the right is after. And like I say, we haven't even used Lightroom or Photoshop for any of this. This is just the raw import, okay? So try to remember that. This is not Photoshop. This is just Adobe Raw import. Let's go on to the next one. This is a solitary sandpiper that I saw out at Clyde Shepherd the other day. Looked pretty good. The crop's already pretty nice. We'll go right here. And like those photographs in the morning, the sun is about 20 degrees above the horizon. So the right of the bird is oversaturated. The left side of the bird is in the shadows. Yeah, it'd be better if I got out in the middle of the pond and shot the other direction, but you know, that's not possible all the time. So let's do some of that, turn down the highlights. There are a million things you can do with this software. This is a very rudimentary introduction to shooting in RAW. All right, I'm gonna go use the adjustment brush. I'm gonna bring up all this area here, and I need a little bit larger paintbrush. So I'm gonna go up to about 5. See how big that is? Then I'm gonna click this box so I can see where I'm painting. And what it does when you're using it is that it masks off an area of similar colors. So if you stick it on something, it masks off all the similar colors around it. You'll get to understand that really quickly when you start using it. It's pretty rudimentary stuff. It's very easy to use. It's just intimidating to people that have never used it. And I don't know why. Just get in there and use it. All right, so there we go. Now I'm gonna turn off this mask so I can see the image while I'm adjusting it. And obviously that's way too bright because these are the same settings that we used on the eyes of the bird last time. So let's reset the local correction settings. Goes back to the way it was before. And then turn up shadows. And remember, anything I do here only affects the area that I have masked off. All right, so just a very minor, subtle adjustment takes it from that to this. It's really remarkable. You could never do that with a JPEG version of this image. Let's go on to the next one. And yeah, I do usually spend more than 15 seconds on my photos, but it's a webinar. So here we go.
Stephen, let me jump in with another question if you don't mind.
Okay.
We've got another question about external hard drives as in terms of what's needed for computing power, either Mac or PC. That might be part of your tips, but
yes.
It out there for you.
I would get the absolute largest external hard drive you could possibly get, 2 terabyte minimum. They're so cheap now. 2 terabyte hard drives about $125. Really, if you follow the workflow that I'm showing you, you're not going to need an external hard drive anytime soon. It's only when you use Lightroom and its cataloging portion of its software that you run out of your hard drive space, because Lightroom wants to save every raw photo you've ever taken. And, you know, I think that's a bad idea. I mean, I might see saving like a National Geographic trophy-winning raw image, but why do you want to save, you know, 1,000 raw files a day? You're never going to look at them again. And it's just soaking up all your hard drive space. So my workflow, when we save these images, we're not going to save the raws. I mean, I'm just going to get rid of them. And I'm going to show you how to save these images into TIFF format, which is non-compressed, where you can still get some editing done if you have to. But TIFF format is great for social media. It's great for printing. It's great for sharing. If you want to send it to a magazine, it's high res enough, but it's a way less storage space than saving the RAW and the JPEG, etc. So later on, we're going to, really in just about 5 or 6 minutes, we're going to show you how I manage my files after I've done the adjustments I like. So here we go. Was there another question? Oh, and Mac or PC, it doesn't matter anymore. I'm a big Mac fan. Some people are big PC fans.
Do you have a preferred lens for your bird photography? Andy would like to know.
I prefer a Canon 800 millimeter f2.8, except I don't have $200,000. So I use, currently I use a 600 millimeter f4 birding lens. By far the most common lens I see birders use out there for Canon is the 100-400, which is around $2,000, or the Nikon 200-500, which is about $1,200. Those two lenses are the best value and the most common birding lenses out there for serious bird photographers. So if you're looking to buy something, the lens is way more important than the camera body these days, because every camera body you buy has got so much capability that you're never going to use more than about a third of it. Put the money into the lens. So again, the Canon 100-400 is the most common awesome bird lens out there. And the Nikon 200-500 is the most common awesome Nikon lens. How we doing on time? We good? All right. So here's a great blue heron eating a tadpole. I'm going to quickly turn up the shadows, turn down the highlights, give it a little contrast, a little saturation, some dehaze, a little texture. You know, this is a very interesting photograph to me. I'm just going to crop out a lot of this junk over here. You know, you don't have to have the entire bird in every photograph. If it's a cool looking shot of the bird, you know, just crop it like that. Crop it any way you want. I mean, it's your photograph. Make it look the way you want it. There's another one. There's him eating a crawdad, the same blue heron. A little bit out of focus though, and you can't fix focus. All right, here's a titmouse eating a grub. We've already done a good titmouse photo. Let's skip that one. Here's an out of focus green heron shot. Would have been beautiful, man, had it been focused. Can't fix focus. There you go. Here's a really cool black-billed cuckoo we saw a couple days ago at Clyde Shepherd. Great image. You had to really make a quick decision on getting this bird's photograph, so I did not have any time to change anything. But luckily, since I shot it in RAW, I can go back and just edit the crap out of it, and just like I'm still sitting at the camera. So first thing I'm going to do on this image is take my adjustment brush, go over here and raise up this little area here. Okay, so that's what I've selected. Now I'm going to just turn up the brightness a little bit, the exposure. Give myself some shadows there to bring up the dark part of that a little bit. Put some saturation in to bring out that red eye ring. And I'm really not going to mess with it much more because this photo already looks pretty good. Turn down the highlights some, a little saturation for the entire photo, some contrast maybe, and boom. Just the cropping made this image look a million times better. So in 10 seconds, we went from that to this. It doesn't look like a whole lot of difference, but I think it looks pretty good. All right, so let's go to the next one. It's just a copy of the same one. Okay, I thought I had a other image in here, maybe not. Okay, now on to the workflow part. I thought I had a really good blue heron image from Buddy Harrell that he sent over, but I don't see it in here, so we're just gonna skip it. Now, what you got on your left-hand side is a list of all your RAWs that you imported. This is called the film strip over on the left, okay? And the ones with the X on them are ones you deleted, and the ones without the X are the ones you saved. So what I do now is select all of these images. There's a million ways to select all images. You can click the first one, hold the shift key down and click the last one. You can just hit Control A and that'll select all of them, whatever. But I want this save command to apply to all images. All right, and remember, I can't show you right now. We used the actual folder from our camera card and dragged it over to the desktop. So right now I have a bunch of raw files in a folder on my desktop. Okay. Just no video. My wife's walking by. So I'm going to save all of these files. I've selected all the images. I'm going to choose Save Images, and it comes up with a dialog box. Okay. Where do you want to save them is the first question. I just save them in the same location. That way I know they're going to the same folder that I created for my raw files. What do you want to name them? Okay, well, if you want to name them something, you can. It'll name every file the same prefix with a number after it. Like if you want to call this webinar image May 12th, 2020. You can do that. Whatever you want to name them, or you can just leave it blank and it'll use the same name as your raw file, which is normally what I do, because I don't really want to name them anything different than they're already named, because the raw file name already has the date and time. So I'm just going to leave that blank. Now, file extension. You have a choice of saving them in DNGs, JPEGs, Photoshop documents, PNGs, PONGs, TIFFs, GIFs, whatever. I strongly recommend TIF images, TIFF file, something interchange format. And the format you want is TIFF. Metadata, that's your copyright and all that kind of stuff. If you're interested in all that mess that's on your camera, it'll save that information in your metadata. You know, I'd recommend doing that just in case. I don't worry about anybody, you know, stealing my photos. I'm not that good. Why would anyone steal my photos? But a lot of people like to put their copyright info on there. Compression, very important. Do not compress your saved TIFF files, because that disallows you from any future editing. Since we're going to dump our raw files, we want to save uncompressed TIFF files so we can still have some editing room if needed. Color space, don't worry about it. Adobe RGB, that's great. You can resize all the images if that's your thing. I don't resize any of them. I like the weather sized already. So output sharpening. Do not sharpen your output images, because you don't want the computer doing anything for you. You want to manually control everything done to your image. So once I've got all this saved, that's great. So according to this dialog box, it's going to save in the same location as a TIFF file uncompressed. So save. Now down here, the status is showing what's going on, 8 remaining, 7 remaining. So even out of these 25 awesome raw images that I selected just for this webinar, only 8 of them were good enough to save, in my opinion. So, all right, it's done saving now. And when you press done on this Adobe Camera Raw importer, it deletes the raw files that you had crossed and saves the raw files that you did not have deleted. Okay, so you still got your raw files for the cameras, for the pictures you selected. You will also have TIFF versions of those raw files, but you will lose all the raw files that you deleted. Done. All right, there's Buddy Harrell's awesome photo. It's a CR2, that's why it didn't transfer over. Let's give that a quick, turn it down. Highlights down. I was going to use this to show how you can get a blurred background, but in the interest of time, let's just crop it and do this. Buddy Harrell shot this photograph at Clyde Shepherd today. I thought it was really an amazing example of a raw image and what you can do with a somewhat overexposed raw file, as long as you shot in raw. Okay, yeah, that's pretty awesome. So I'm going to save that image also in the same location as a TIFF file. Save, done. Okay, so now we're out of the Adobe Raw import. And if you noticed here in our folder, all the raw files that I dragged and dropped from my card are still highlighted over here. I'm just going to dump them because I don't need them anymore, man. You know, if you want to save your raws, that's fine. I'm dumping them. into my garbage can because I don't see any need to save them. If you're going to save it as an uncompressed TIFF file, why are you saving a raw file with it? I mean, if you're some professional photographer that's going to have to recreate these images for some purpose, and yeah, you know, save your raws, but you're going to be soaking up hard drive space, man. I prefer just to dump them. These XMP files right here, these are the records of all the changes you made to those raw files that we just dumped in case you wanted to undo some of those changes. Now, Lightroom saves all the raws, all the XMPs, all the TIFFs, all the JPEGs. And Lightroom is a great program and it allows you really easy access. But when you get seriously involved in wildlife photography and obsessed with it like we are, you're going to fill up your hard drives in no time. So you got to put in some sort of way in which, you know, to save some space, man. Let's see if I can. Okay, there's my selfie. Hey, everybody, I'm still here. All right, so I'm going to dump these XMP files also because I've already edited them. I like the way they look. What I'm left with is this folder, which now contains 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 files of about 21 megs apiece. So that's 210 megs total. In Lightroom, this would be over 700 megabytes because it'd be saving the RAWs, the XMPs, and the TIFFs. Doing it, okay, it's actually 179 megs. So it'd be about 600 megs in Lightroom. If you save your RAW files, like I say, you're just gonna fill up immediately. I just recommend saving the TIFFs, man. So here we go.
Stephen, why do you recommend TIFF over something like a JPEG?
Because TIFF is still a 12-bit format versus JPEG, which is 8-bit. And it still allows you to do some editing. It is not nearly as much editing as you can do on a RAW file, but you still have a lot of leeway in case you want to change something in the image for a different use. And, you know, if you're just going to put it on Facebook, then you're wasting your time saving it in anything other than a JPEG because Facebook will not display anything over 8 bits and over a certain file size. So if you upload a 200 megabit JPEG image to Facebook, it immediately resamples it as whatever their small picture size is and immediately changes it to 8-bit. So if you're just doing social media, save it as a compressed JPEG. It doesn't matter. If you're going to do anything other than social media with your images, or if you just want to look at a really high clarity image on a big monitor at home, I suggest saving it in TIFF. It's kind of a trade-off between JPEG and RAW. So that's why I like it, uncompressed TIFF. If hard drive space is at a minimum, then save it as a JPEG. But just realize you're giving up a lot of your future editing capability. So I've got this folder here. Yes.
I was going to make one more comment. Steve Rushing, he's on with us. I've seen quite a few of his photographs. He's quite a great photographer himself. And he is chiming in about the Lightroom mobile app. He believes that it can edit RAW files.
Okay.
So that's something to look into. And let me.
Well, how would you get them on the phone is the question. Yeah.
I don't know. What size SD card do you use in your camera, Stephen?
I use a 256 gigabyte SD card. Really 32 gigabyte SD or my camera uses a CF card or CFast card. 32 gigs is going to handle what most people are shooting without any problem. The trick is to empty it off after you use it. You know, I've seen a lot of people walk around with these cards in their camera that have photos from 2 years ago on them. Your camera card is not a very safe way to store your treasured photos. So I clean mine off after every shot and I drag it like you saw at the beginning. You drag it over to the desktop and there it is. And I clean my camera card off every time. I usually use about 60 to 70 gigabytes on a standard day of photography. But I don't leave them on the card. You know, maybe that's just an obsessive thing with me, but if I had a bunch of old photos on there, every time I went to drag today's photos over, I'd be dragging over all these old photos also. So 32 gigs ought to be plenty for any camera work you're doing on a daily basis, as long as you clean it off every day. So I've got this folder here still, Adobe Raw Webinar is what it's called. And here it is. So on my computer, I have a 2 terabyte hard drive over here. That's my main hard drive that I use for my daily operation. I have backups that I use. I have 3 separate hard drives that I use for long-term storage. You know, I don't store everything on my hard drive because something else about computers, if you've got less than 15% of your hard drive space available on your computer is going to crash and you're going to lose all of your data. So really you should keep your computer's operating system hard drive as clean as possible with as much free space as possible. And that's a whole nother webinar. But if you're pushing the edge of your hard drive and you're down to less than 10%, you are going to lose all your data in short order in no time. So I use an external hard drive to store my stuff, and I call it big storage, okay? Because it's big, it's 10 terabytes. It's actually another Mac that I have connected on a network that I have a RAID set up on. So anyway, there's my big storage drive. And the contents of this drive are arranged by date. I like to know the date I took it and the place I was or some interesting thing about that day. So here's 2011, July 2nd, lightning at the racetrack. I was still working as an air traffic controller and there was a bunch of lightning strikes at the racetrack that day. So I can quickly go and see this photo I took of a lightning strike in TIFF format at Atlanta International Raceway in no time, okay? Very, very quick way to organize. What, 2012 you say? You wanna see me at Georgia Tech doing outreach in 2012 in February? Okay, well here's a date, you know, encoded, location encoded file of me doing just that. Okay, here's a picture I took of the sun from Georgia Tech on that day, and I can pull it up in no time. You know, it's a very efficient storage technique. Let's get up to 2018 or 19, way down here. Okay, here's 2018 Clyde Shepherd Nature Preserve barred owls. Let's look at some barred owl photos. All right, there's my barred owl photo in TIFF format. Okay, and there it is. I mean, I can find it immediately. Okay, notice that none of these folders have raw or any of that stuff in them. They're all just TIFF images from different days. Okay, and they are plenty high resolution enough for whatever purposes you're going to be using. So that's what I do. Now, yeah, go ahead.
So one more question, a couple questions actually. So in Lightroom, are you able to control not to save the raw images once you're done with the editing?
I'm not sure because I don't use it. Lightroom is an organizational program on the Mac. It is not really a photo editing program. It's an organizational program that uses Adobe Camera Raw to edit photos. So I'm sure there is a way to do that. Lightroom creates these enormous library files, which is great. I mean, if you've got an enormous hard drive, it's great. And feel free to use it. I'm not suggesting you don't use it. It's just this webinar is about the Adobe Camera Raw portion of the software, which is in Lightroom, Photoshop, Adobe Bridge, Adobe Fireworks, Adobe Illustrator. We're talking about the raw importer. So Lightroom, I'll be happy to get Kevin Gaston or somebody to do another series on that, but I don't actually use that software because of the fact that it creates such an enormous drain on my hard drive space. I prefer to organize my files myself. But yes, I'm sure there is a way to do that.
All right, so anyway, our friend Lacey's on, and this may be the same, you know, you may not be able to get into detail with this, but is there any way to distinguish Camera Raw versus Photoshop versus Lightroom and the best usages for each?
I'm not sure if I even understand the question, but Camera Raw is any software that imports a raw file off any DSLR onto your computer so you can edit it. And in this case, we're using Adobe Camera Raw, which is part of Lightroom, Photoshop, and Adobe Bridge, etc. I know Lisa uses the Nikon camera. She's a Sunlit Earth donor and a great friend of mine. Nikon software that comes with your camera will take your Nikon RAWs, which are called DNG, I think, and convert there's an importer for that too. And that's in Photoshop, Lightroom, or whatever software you want to use. So again, Lightroom is an organizational program for photography. Photoshop is an editing program for photography and other uses. Adobe Camera Raw software, which is the topic of this webinar, is software that interprets your raw image from your camera and allows you to edit it into a different format. So that's what we're talking about today, Adobe Camera Raw. I hope I covered that. And Lacey will call me if I didn't, because, you know, she's tough. So back to this real quick, as far as organizing my folders. Once I'm done with my editing and I've saved everything, I've dumped my raws, I want to name this folder something. First, the date. I go by year, 2020, 5/12. And then I name something about the subject of it. Autobahn webinar. Okay, so now that I've named it something with the date and the subject, I drag it and drop it over to my big storage there. Okay, and it's copying the folders over to my external hard drive in this case. And then I click it, drag it, and drop it, man, in the trash. Get rid of it, because you don't want to save all these files on your operating system hard drive. Put them on an external drive, put them on a second hard drive, whatever. Keep your main operating system hard drive clean, because the more crap you put on it, the slower it's going to run. So that's my particular workflow. And then of course I drag and drop my camera card to the trash so I can eject it. And oh, I didn't have the screen shared at all during that. Sorry about that. But I put my camera card back into my camera and I'm ready for another day of shooting. Okay. Now you can also do this with all your cameras by using the USB cable that came with it and just plugging that cable into whatever computer you want to transfer them to, and you can transfer them over that way from the camera to the computer, but it is exponentially slower to use a USB cable than it is to just transfer directly from the card. So let me, oh, I am screen sharing. Okay, good. So that is sort of a breaking point here for the lecture, and I'm going to go back to my beautiful face and see if anybody is interested in any other questions.
Steven, does anybody have any other questions? Just put them in the chat box or in the Q&A section. Let's see, is it good to have battery grip for Nikon D500 to improve the battery?
Absolutely. You can't have enough battery grip, in my opinion, on any camera. A battery grip, if those of you that don't know, is a device that screws into the bottom of your DSLR, and it contains 2 batteries instead of 1, which doubles your shooting time, so you don't have to carry a bunch of extra batteries with you, and you don't have to change batteries all the time. The Canon 1DX Mark II that I'm using already has that built into the camera, and it's got a battery life of about 12 hours, which is very convenient if you're obsessive like me and you're going to be out in the woods all day. So battery grip is a fantastic additive to any DSLR that doesn't already have one. They're inexpensive, in the $75 to $100 range, and it doubles your battery lifetime immediately. So yes, I highly recommend it.
Any other questions? Dave Keekenmeister would like to know how much espresso you drink to edit a full day's photo shoot.
Well, let me tell you about that. I have a espresso machine over here that I almost got divorced over. I drink a significant amount of caffeine, let's say. Air traffic control taught me a couple things, and that's drink a lot of coffee and, how to sleep in 4-hour chunks throughout the day. So
I will just say, if you ever have the privilege of going on one of our weekend trips with Atlanta Audubon, and Stephen happens to be on that trip, he's got a little travel espresso machine that he brings and serves lattes out of his hotel room or back of his truck in the morning. So
yes,
he's great to have along on the trips.
I like to feel civilized. I like to have a nice life.
We appreciate it. Well, all right. I don't see any other questions, Stephen. So I think what we'll do is if you have any other questions for us, feel free to send them over by email. You can use my email address, Michelle, M-I-C-H-E-L-L-E @atlantaAudubon.org. And it's been great to see everyone tonight. And we'll have this recorded webinar up on our website here in the next few days if you'd like to go back and rewatch it while you are editing your own photos. Thanks, Stephen.
Yeah, everybody come join the Sunlit Earth Facebook page, and we'll do more advanced topics if you like. You just let Michelle or Audubon Society know, and we'll do webinars on whatever topic you like. Adios.
All right. Have a good evening, everyone.